What should we do? What
I'm
kind of
like
face should
only thinking we should make funny faces.
we're like,
Said I'm all about it. Yeah, I'm all about it. Said I'm all about it. Yeah, 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 yeah. Said I'm all about it. Yeah, I'm all about it. Said I'm all about it. Yeah, 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 yeah.
hello and welcome to a bonus episode of Two Women Yelling About Knitting, a show that is not about what we're buying or what we're making, but instead asks questions like, is there a difference between art and craft? I'm Anjali, and I'm a knitter in Denver, Colorado.
I'm Allison, and I'm a knitter living outside of Washington, D.C. We're friends who share a love of knitting as well as an interest in a lot of sticky topics that relate to knitting, and we just finished our first 6-episode season. We'll be back in the new year with season 2, so hit subscribe to follow along. So, what is this bonus mini episode about?
Well, I came to Washington, D.C. earlier this year in the fall, and we decided to use the opportunity to check out an exhibit that you had been hearing about.
Yeah, so Anjali was here. That's when we recorded our episode 5, which was very exciting. And we had literally one day together. And I was like, let's go. I saved this. I was like, let's go to this state fair exhibit that is being hosted at one of the Smithsonian museums. The title of the actual exhibit is State Fair's Growing American Craft. It's at the Renwick Gallery, which is an offshoot, a subsidiary of the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And so we spent the morning there during Anjali's day off from her work trip.
And we both loved it and took a lot of footage while we were there because there was just so much to see and so much to talk about. And we wanted to just take a moment and do this bonus episode, kind of walking you through what we got out of that exhibit and some of our favorite pieces, because if you are a knitter or do any kind of crafting, I think it's something that you would really love as well.
It's at the Renwick Gallery, which is part of the Smithsonian American Art Museum in DC. It is open for almost another full year, but not everybody will have the opportunity to come here to see it, so we wanted to bring some of it to you. It related to so many of the themes that we've talked about this season, and there were a couple in particular that we wanted to highlight. Anjali, what was a big takeaway for you from this exhibit?
My biggest takeaway was just thinking about what is art, what is craft, and why do we create this sort of false dichotomy between the two? Because walking into that museum and seeing the kind of works that were on display that are pretty solidly classified as craft, I think, in the American world of museums and art. But to me, they had all the characteristics of what you would think of as art, just the creativity, making me think about the world in a different way, incredible skill with the chosen medium, and just beauty and so it's hard to look at that and not think about the fact that perhaps it's because these crafts and state fairs, the competitions in state fairs in things like quilting, knitting, rug hooking, these types of things are often dominated by women, older women. So is that why they are discounted? Is it like the rural-urban divide where these works are being created and shown in rural parts of the country far away from big art galleries? Is that why they're not considered art? Is it because they're rooted in Native American or other indigenous craft practices that they're not considered art? So those were kinds of things that I was thinking about, and was just happy to have this exhibit that is really cataloging and collecting and displaying these works as the pieces of art that they are.
Yeah, and related to that, another perhaps reason for this art versus craft divide, which was one of my big takeaways, was the amateur versus professional question, which we talked about in our episode 2, and just what it means, to monetize the hobby of knitting, but more generally speaking, that idea of what it means to be an amateur, what it means to be a professional, and if it's not professional, can it not be art? being one of the questions that doesn't just apply to knitting, but applies in so many other media as well. Many of the works on display either had in their information, or even one work in particular was made entirely out of award ribbons from state fairs that the quilter had received for other projects. And this idea of competition, winning a nominal prize for something that you've made, but it's still in that amateur realm and it's worth $50, not $50,000. And is that what draws the line for us between art and craft? And is that how it should work?
I'm just thinking about like Great British Bake Off and how they just win a cake plate. Like after all of that,
versus America, where it's like, here's $100,000 for your 30-minute television show or whatever. Yeah,
but it's also
point.
just the respect of your peers, that you are being named the best at the work that you do.
In the Olympics, right? That's another big realm where we have a divide between amateur and professional, and you get a medal at the end. But somehow taking the money out of it does lend it also an air of purity, but then do we sacrifice? But then we also still live in a capitalist society, so
right. So who can afford to do that?
Right, to do it for the purity. And again, this, as we've tried this whole time, this isn't necessarily answering those questions or being like, and here's the definitive takeaway that is 100% true. But just this exhibit brought up those interesting questions again of amateur, professional, and monetary compensation for craft or art. And it was, an interesting theme.
Yeah, and I also really appreciated that there was a discussion of sort of state fairs and farming communities, rural communities, and communities of color. So there was a whole room that was about Black farmers, and there was a section, which I'll talk about more later, that just covering Native American tribal fairs and kind of the arts and crafts that have been traditionally displayed at those types of fairs.
So we thought we would highlight a couple of the pieces that we particularly liked, give you all our best amateur footage of those pieces, and just talk a little bit about what drew us to them, what we took away from them. So I guess I will start. My first piece that I was really drawn to, that unfortunately I didn't take great notes on, and I went to their website and they don't have it. They do have, and we'll link below to the exhibit website, and they do have some pieces kind of available to see in great detail. But one of the pieces was a wreath that was made up of a lot of different materials, including human hair. And so I did Google it, human hair wreath, trying to find it, and I did find multiple other human hair wreaths in the Smithsonian collection that are not on view. And it was certainly an older piece. And there is this like really interesting Victorian tradition of like hair and like as a death ritual and keeping lockets of people's hair, and just using hair in any sort of art object or as a craft or art material. Again, pushing these boundaries of what art versus craft means, or like what is an acceptable form of art. I don't know, Anjali, have you seen anything I've seen this on social media, and it's not even recent, it's like footage from like the 60s or 70s of people making like sweaters out of their like dogs. There was actually, there was a talk at, I think it was Maryland Sheep and Wool, about like how to like, I think it was if it was not a talk from this person, there is a book that I've come across called Knitting with Dog Hair. Better a sweater from a dog you know and love than a sheep you'll never meet.
That's a great title. And even though I do not want to do anything with that's hair.
Not everybody's cup of tea, but it relates back to me to this like Victorian hair locket, hair wreath situation of like the way we memorialize people, or just like that, like, I mean, medieval relics, right, of saints, like the idea of like having a piece of someone's body that will last forever, like physical being, and you memorialize it in a sweater or in a wreath or what have you, is just fascinating to me, and makes me, whether or not it's something I want to do, certainly makes me think about just the definition of art and the way that we have memorialized people and pets over time.
It's just interesting to think about, hair has DNA, and now there are people that are taking the DNA from like beloved dogs and then making a clone of that dog.
Yeah.
Or many clones. And it's, I guess, just another version of a hair wreath or a hair sweater.
100%.
So the first one I wanted to talk about was the room with the seed art, which a seed art piece was kind of the promotional piece for the exhibit as a whole. I had never known anything about seed art, heard about seed art before, so I was just blown away by everything in this room. I actually have a good friend who is from Iowa and loves state fairs, like grew up going to the Minnesota State Fair, and so she was like, tell me all about the seed art. So there is like a queen of seed art, especially at the Minnesota State Fair, and her name is Lillian Colton. Actually, there was a book about her work called Seed Queen. So a lot of the art in that room was actually, there's like a dynasty, her and then her daughter, Linda Paulson. So a lot of the work in the room was work from these two people who competed at the Minnesota State Fair. Starting in 1966 is the first year that Lillian Colton competed, and she, for the next 11 years, won 9 Best in Show ribbons. And then she eventually was like, okay, I have to stop because I'm just like blowing out and no one will ever win when I compete. Basically, I mean, it sounds like she was probably very humble and this was a way for people to feel like they had a reason for entering the competition. But every year after that, she would demonstrate her techniques and would have her work featured in a special display. So her work is just incredible, favorite of mine. I also just love that it's like a lot of like Prince. There was like a Prince portrait.
Oh, yeah, we should put up it was like a series of just the most iconic yet unlikely grouping of people. Like Betty White, Prince. I mean, it was great. We'll have to remember what it was, but.
And then I loved the Dolly Parton portrait for like the sort of straw that was used to make her hair. It's so beautiful and just really interesting, fun, like makes me smile. And then there was another piece from an artist named Annie Wells called Celebrate Trans Love and Joy. And this artist loved the State Fair so much that they got married there with their partner Molly Ritchie. And so this is a piece of the building, like the iconic building at the State Fair, where I think their wedding was outside of this building. So I really love that one, and like immediately texted that one to my friend who is from Iowa, because I think you think about state fairs and rural places, and it's not necessarily places where trans people are welcome. And so to have this piece of a very iconic, like an iconic state fair art form sort of celebrating a trans wedding was just a cool juxtaposition of two things that don't normally go together in people's minds.
Did this woman whom you mentioned at the beginning, did she invent the seed art experience process?
No, so let me see. I found a whole article about it, which I can link below. But so Linda Paulson, the daughter, actually heard about crop art when it started in 1965, and she told her mom, Lillian Colton, the seed queen, to check it out. In the days before TV, they said Lillian had done like sketching and embroidery, so she already was doing some sorts of crafts. And she visited the fair and then came home and told her daughter, I think I can do that. I have the rule book. And then she just ran with it. So then she encouraged her daughter, Linda, to start, and she entered in 1967, I think. And it's kind of interesting because they were both adults. Linda was already an adult and had a 2-year-old child. And she was like, I don't know, this feels really messy. I don't know. But then she entered that first piece and she won a prize. And then she said she was hooked and it was a good hobby for me. So Linda is 80 and still lives in Minnesota, but she hasn't yet found someone to take on the family legacy. Like they don't have none of her children are interested, but she has a grandchild where she's like, maybe I can pass this on.
That's when, okay, so maybe that will lead me into my next one, because there's that same connection with the butter cow, that kind of generational connection. There's a huge butter cow in the exhibit, which is made by the artist Sarah Pratt, and she was helped, I believe, by two of her daughters. So you see the butter cow, but then there's also a wonderful video footage of the butter cow being created. But this idea of a skill set being, a handicraft being passed down generation to generation, that is something that we're interested in terms of like people learning to knit, or just like the fiber arts as a kind of, I don't know, it's not necessarily oral tradition, but this kind of like handicraft tradition, a thing that is passed down through generations and taught generation to generation, says the person who like mostly learned to knit on the internet, but still, it is something that can be done that way, and certainly historically has been done that way. So there's this big butter cow, and then there's a pyramid, for lack of a better word. It's like one of the central pieces of the exhibit of canned items, right? So like the whole culinary competition piece of the State Fair, canned goods being something that is a very common, popular category. And so it's just this huge piece in the center of the room of so many different canned items. I think, looking up what they exactly were, it includes pickles, relishes, sauces, vegetables, fruits, jellies, jams, preserves, and butters. Jellies, jams, preserves, and butters being 4 different things, which now I want to go looking more into. And again, with that gender piece of what we've been talking about this season, a lot of these canned items were actually made by Dr. Rodney Zeitler in Iowa. So a man doing this canning practice, which is not necessarily what we think of. I will say the maybe one disappointment we had was that there was only one real piece of like true knitting, like knitted sweater, despite the fact that knitting is a huge category in many state fairs as well. And it was knit by a man who's a lovely knitter and has a really great backstory and is super interesting. But just this interesting question of like assuming you're going to see mostly work by women, and in fact many men represented in this State Fair exhibit. And also this question of what constitutes art, to have a cow made of butter, to have home preserved food kind of displayed in this incredibly artful way, again challenging this idea of what makes something art.
To go back to the kind of generational passing on of craft, the other standout for me was that room that was talking about Native American tribal fairs and displaying some of the works that were coming out of those fairs. So these sorts of tribal fairs and powwows, fashion shows were also similar to state fairs, used to sort of celebrate and document the art coming out of Native American tribes. One of the pieces that I really loved was this Miss Navajo Nation crown made by an artist named Tommy Lowe. This was for the Miss Navajo Nation contest, which sounded like a beauty pageant, but cooler, because the contestants had to demonstrate their knowledge of Dene skills. So they had to do ritual sheep butchering, show fluency in the Dene language, food preparation, and wool spinning, and then giving presentations on history and dress. So the winner is seen as the most representative of the community and as like a role model for other young women. So this artist created this crown, and it's made of sterling silver and embellished with turquoise. So I just love the idea of not only this work of craft and art in the creation of this crown, but also in the competition as a whole. Someone has to embody the values and qualities that they want to see in their community. So another thing that I just appreciated was, having traveled through like the tribal lands in Colorado, spent some time around there, I know that often the places where reservations are located are because they are so rural, are often very conservative places. And I wonder if these like tribal folks would be welcomed in state fairs and able to show their arts and crafts that are being competed for in state fairs. And so I think it's great that there is this tradition of tribal fairs where it can be all about Native American traditions, arts and crafts, and ways of life, and kind of celebrated in this space, and keeping those intergenerational practices and values alive.
So that was another piece of this exhibit, was it talked about contemporary state fairs, but it also had some really interesting historical context, some of which was perhaps, yes, unsurprisingly, that African Americans were excluded from many of these state fairs. So the example given was particularly like the South Carolina State Fair, not just in the crafts, but the farmers, right? Like the ag component of state fairs, which is huge and arguably larger than the craft component, that any African American trying to compete in craft or in agriculture was either not allowed or was held to different standards or was given a lesser prize for their work. And so that kind of racial context of excluding non-white competitors, non-white participants. In fact, the fairs were separate. There were 2 state fairs in South Carolina, and they were separate until 1970. Yeah.
Yeah.
You highlighting the piece of art by the trans artist, expressing a love for state fairs and this question of race and participation in state fairs. Another piece I really loved was the medallion quilt, which was completed by a Jewish woman in the early 20th century who lived in Lincoln, Nebraska. Again, just like not in my mind, as somebody who was raised Jewish, it's like Lincoln, Nebraska doesn't strike me as like a hotbed of Jewish culture. But of course, like that's the time period when we have a lot of immigrants coming, especially from Eastern Europe. So this woman, Bertha Needon, had emigrated from what was then Russia to Lincoln, Nebraska in the early 20th century. And she made this quilt. It took her 5 years, 1909 to 1914, and it's made up of 10,222 pieces. And that's what drew me to it. Like just the intricacy and geometry of the design was really astonishing and beautiful to me. And then as I was reading more about it, was just fascinated by the story. So she was a seamstress, and it's unclear if the material was left over from projects that she, work projects she had, or if she had actually brought some of this fabric with her from Russia. And it won first place at the Nebraska State Fair in 1914. So that was really cool to see too, again, these like older pieces. And that the hair wreath was also older. It was nice to also see just like that kind of both change and progression and also similarities in terms of like work from 100 years ago and work from today. I would say that quilts, in my mind, quilts kind of dominated the exhibit. Would you say that's true? Like there were a lot of quilts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were a lot of quilts.
And so just to see these examples from so many different times, there was also a little extra thing to throw in there for knitters, right? Knitters and crocheters, temperature blankets are such a thing. There was a temperature quilt as well, which I was not aware was a thing.
Wait, what is a temperature quilt?
Or a temperature blanket. Do you know about a temperature blanket in knitting?
No.
Oh, so you actually, when I went to Rhinebeck, it was being highlighted at a tent that was like about climate change and knitting. So you pick a color to represent a temperature range, and you knit a couple rows literally every day of the year to then correspond to the temperature range that day. Yeah. And, to see if you made one every year to see how that changes, you make it every year. Oh gosh. I mean, even in our lifetime, and yeah, so somebody had done a temperature quilt with the colors of the fabric corresponding to temperature range.
Cool.
Yeah.
And they say crafters don't know what scientists know. The last one I want to talk about is actually 2 pieces that were sort of thematically similar, using craft to maybe heal from trauma, is how I would put it. So the first was a large quilt that was a group project from the Battered Offenders Self-Help Group in Shelby County, Kentucky. So these were a group of women that were incarcerated in the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women. And the quilt was from 1995, and it was a project where people made a square, a quilt square, and I think they all were drawing on like a white piece of fabric the story of their domestic abuse that they had endured. And I think it was kind of telling the story of like, this is what I went through, and was the kind of the story behind the crime that I committed that brought me here to being incarcerated. So it was extremely graphic, and there was violence and physical abuse and sexual assault. So honestly, it was hard to look at. I found myself having to kind of leave and come back because it was hard to look through all of those squares all at once, but also incredibly powerful to see these really honest stories captured in this quilt, which is like an object that makes you think of like home and comfort. And apparently when it was displayed at the fair, the Kentucky governor was moved so much by the work that he commuted the women's sentences. He said that had the quilt not been made, I'm quite confident that I, in the midst of all the other responsibilities of the job, would not have looked into this issue in the in-depth way that I did. So just seeing this quilt moved him to think more about the abuse that these women had endured and what led
And
them
like
to where they were.
craftivism at its best.
And very personal craftivism too.
Yeah.
Similarly, a piece that really moved me was actually what turned out to be the first piece. We actually went through the exhibit backwards, so we didn't see it as the first piece, but it is the first thing on display as you walk in. And it's a hooked rug made by K.D. Miller, who lives in Louisville, Kentucky. And she made this in 2019, dedicated to her father, Alicia Delaney, who was raised on an Indiana farm and then experienced PTSD after witnessing the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And the information about this rug said that before he died, she created this rug to help him see the value and beauty in his life. I just think that's so beautiful and special, and I have someone close to me in my life who is kind of going through a similar thing with their aging father. And you know, this father came up in a time where like the man was the center of the household, meant to keep everything together, like seen as like the most powerful and useful member of society, and now upon aging is feeling depressed, but is from a generation where they don't know what to do with depression. They don't feel like it's okay to talk to a therapist or take medication or do anything to treat your own mental health. So I just love that his daughter decided to take the time to create this beautiful physical object that celebrates his life and points out to him like all the goodness that has been in his life and continues to be in his life. And I really love the detail of her including a green onion because he ate one every single day. So this rug won the Best in Show award at the 2019 Kentucky State Fair, and it's definitely a piece that I still think about really frequently since we went to the exhibit.
That's such a lovely detail, the green onion, and kind of like that everyday, like quotidian thing that we don't think about or point to, but that has such meaning to it, which I think also comes back to this theme of craft and like utility, right? Like a rug that is underfoot, that we don't necessarily pay that much attention to, like something being useful can diminish how we see it possibly as art. And yet it's really the opposite, where it's like to highlight that everyday use and the practicality of it to keep someone warm, to keep a floor covered, to eat out of, to eat itself, really actually elevates it ultimately.
And I think it also goes back to the time that it takes to create something by hand, and the love of like every hook of that rug, and this daughter thinking about her father with every hook of this rug that she's making. I think we all feel it with the question of, is someone knit worthy or not? Like, I think that's part of it, is it takes so much time to create something from hand for someone, and are they going to understand and appreciate all that you put into that? And I think it's the people that really do like feel that love and deeply love you back for providing that to them that are the people that we call knitworthy.
Agree. So this exhibit is open at the Renwick Gallery through September 7th of 2026. It is part of the Smithsonian Group of Museums, which means that it is free. If you ever get to Washington, D.C., you absolutely should take advantage of the Smithsonian Museums. As long as the government is not shut down, they are open almost every day of the year and are completely free. So if you get a chance to come see it, I think anybody who's taking the time to watch this would really get a lot out of it. And if that is not an option for you, we very much hope that this episode has given you a little insight into what it would be like to be able to see it.
And also wanted to add that we've gotten a lot of new subscribers since we released our episode 6. And so welcome if you're new here, and please tell your friends, like and subscribe so that more people can find out about this show.
And we love having you engage with us. We're constantly like texting each other like, oh, did you see this comment? Like, we really do love hearing from you. So if you have any experience with entering a state fair, have any fond memories of state fairs, I certainly do. In my childhood, we went to the Union Fair and the Blue Hill Fair in Maine, and those are still really great memories for me. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever won a ribbon? Have you ever been a judge? Very interested in this whole state fair culture, and would love to hear from anybody who has any thoughts on the topic.
And we'll be back in the new year with season 2, so look for that. And if you have any ideas, suggestions, or requests for what we should talk about in season 2, please drop them in the comments.
Thanks for watching.